From love to prison, one woman's battle for freedom. Claire Parker still remembered the moment she married Daniel Hayes. Every camera flash, every sparkler, every congratulating smile from guests who believed they were witnessing the birth of a perfect life. Daniel was everything an American woman dreamed of: handsome, confident, settled in his career, and a man who spoke about forever as if it were a promise backed by gold. 3 days after the wedding, Claire moved into his family's century-old house on Cedar Lane. A house so quiet in the daytime it sounded like a museum, and so cold at night it felt like someone left the windows open. Daniel lived with his younger brother Blake and his mother Margaret. The idea was temporary, Daniel promised. "We'll stay here just for a few months while we build our life," he whispered into her hair. Claire believed him. At first, house rules seemed harmless. Margaret insisted on traditional dinners and early mornings. Blake joked about chores and privacy. Claire kept smiling because she came from a small Midwest town where you didn't complain, you tried to fit in. But slowly the warmth faded. The first sign came when Claire's phone disappeared. Then her jewelry. Her debit card. Every time Claire questioned it, Daniel would chuckle and say she misplaced things. She wanted to trust him because that was the promise she had made before God and everyone she loved. Days passed. Claire tried to become the perfect wife. She cooked, cleaned, folded laundry with a quiet desire to be accepted. But the walls listened. The house listened. Someone else was always watching. At night when Daniel was asleep, she sat by the bedroom window and stared outside at the lonely neighborhood streetlights. She repeated the vow she believed she still had the power to keep: "I will make this work." But one evening Claire overheard Margaret whispering from the living room. "She brought her money. She brought her name. She thinks she's staying." The house wasn't temporary. It was a trap. As Claire's heart tightened, Daniel called her name from the kitchen, not with love, but with command. Claire had no idea the real marriage had not yet begun. The first month peeled the paint off the illusion. Claire learned the Hayes family lived not in unity but in a silent legal war. Margaret controlled everything: Daniel's income, Blake's future, even the house deed. Daniel had grown up believing love was earned only through obedience. Claire's independence became a threat. One afternoon, Claire walked into the kitchen and found Blake sitting at the table with a stack of her private documents, bank statements, insurance papers, and her wedding contract. They weren't stolen. They were examined. "Daniel wants to go over your finances," Blake said without looking up. "He needs to know what you're contributing." Claire stood frozen. "My finances are private," she replied. Blake smirked. "Not in this house." That evening while they had dinner, Daniel announced it without emotion. "I moved your savings into my account. It's safer there." Claire felt her lungs collapse. No discussion. No consent. Just a statement. Margaret nodded as if this were normal marriage behavior. Blake grinned like he had witnessed a show. "You're married now," Daniel added. "Stop acting like a single woman." Claire wanted to scream. She wanted to run. But the words stayed locked in her mouth like a ghost with no voice. She was raised on hope and commitment. Marriage was sacred. Marriage deserved patience. So she whispered, "Okay." That night Claire tried to stay in the guest room, desperate for space. Margaret appeared in the doorway like a shadow. "Wives don't sleep alone in this house." Claire stepped back into the bedroom she no longer recognized. Daniel was already asleep, uncaring. Claire lay beside him with her eyes open, staring into the dark. But the darkness wasn't empty. It held answers and warnings. She saw the truth piece by piece, like someone turning on a light dimmer. Daniel had taken her savings. Blake had taken her privacy. Margaret had taken her freedom. And she had given up her voice. But something sharp awoke inside her, a cold, quiet resilience. She didn't cry. She planned. Tomorrow morning, Claire would discover the house had one more rule, and breaking it would come with a price. The morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor like a new beginning, but Claire had already learned that this house didn't welcome light. Margaret was standing at the stove, frying eggs while pointing at a handwritten list taped to the refrigerator. House rules. Claire had seen it before but never read it. Today she did. Breakfast exactly at 7 a.m. No locked doors. No phone without permission. No purchases without approval. No visiting family without Daniel. Claire's breath hitched. These weren't boundaries. They were in control. "You'll get used to it," Margaret said. "We just run home with discipline." Claire's voice cracked. "I'm not a child." Margaret didn't raise her voice. "That depends on how you behave." Before Claire could respond, Daniel walked in wearing a uniform she hadn't seen before, construction gear, gloves, boots splattered with dust. He wasn't the charming man from her wedding day. He was a hardened version of someone she didn't know. "We're going to the bank today," he said. "Your name comes off the credit." Claire stared at him in disbelief. "You promised we'd build everything together." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "I'm building. You're living in it." Those words landed like a slap. Blake leaned against the counter, watching her fall apart from a safe emotional distance. He enjoyed the show. Claire walked outside to get air. The backyard was fenced, 6 feet of wood closing her in. Beyond it, she could see the neighbor's American flag waving gently. Their lives seemed ordinary. Free. Margaret followed her outside and said something so quietly it felt rehearsed. "You're not leaving. Women like you don't survive out there alone." Claire looked her straight in the eyes. "Women like me built the homes you stand in." Margaret didn't like that. The mask slipped, and for the first time, Claire saw it, a flicker of fear. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who had something to lose. That night she lay awake, the words circling like a whisper. "I'm not a prisoner." But the house reminded her that it controlled everything. Every window, every voice, every dollar. Daniel wasn't protecting her. He was stripping away her life one piece at a time. Soon, Claire would learn the truth nobody had told her. Daniel had done this before. Claire's suspicion grew like a storm waiting for thunder. Everything felt calculated. Every move she made was watched. Every question she asked was deflected. She stopped sharing her thoughts aloud because in this house, words were weapons, used against her at the right moment. Then one afternoon, while Daniel and Blake were out, she found it. The attic. Dust rose like ghosts when she pushed open the creaking door. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering. Boxes were stacked neatly, labeled with names she didn't recognize. Until she saw one. Rebecca Hayes. Daniel's ex-wife. Her heart raced as she opened it. There were photos, letters, and a wedding album. Rebecca was smiling in every single picture, before something broke her. Claire flipped through a journal buried at the bottom. Only one page was filled. "The man I married is not the man I live with now." Claire's knees trembled. She kept reading. "He tells you love means sacrifice. He takes your freedom and calls it protection. He calls the rules tradition. He breaks you slowly." Claire swallowed hard. It was the same pattern. The same trap. The same words Daniel used on her. Then she found a final note, torn and scribbled like a desperate confession. "He took everything. I never got out." Claire's breath caught. That line didn't sound like someone who left. It sounded like someone who had disappeared. A sudden voice from the stairs froze her. "What are you doing up here?" "Margaret." She stood there like a judge, blocking the exit. Claire held her ground. "Where is Rebecca? What happened to her?" Margaret's smile was small and cold. She was stubborn. She didn't understand the rules of marriage. "That's not an answer." Margaret stepped forward slowly. "Daniel is a provider. A protector. He gave her everything. And took everything, Claire whispered. Margaret's eyes sharpened. The strong women stay. The weak women break. Claire clenched her fists. Maybe the strong women escape. Margaret laughed softly. Women don't leave this house. The way she said it wasn't a warning. It was history. Claire would soon realize Rebecca's story wasn't just a warning, it was her future if she didn't fight back. The walls of the house seemed to lean in on Claire after that discovery, like the whole structure carried the weight of every secret ever buried inside it. Every sound felt magnified, the closing of doors, the footsteps on old wood, the ticking of the hallway clock. Nothing was silent anymore. Nothing felt safe. That evening at dinner, Claire tried to act normal. She served chicken and vegetables. She smiled. She listened. But she was watching. Studying every word they spoke, the way someone studies a storm moving closer. Daniel finally looked at her, as if deciding to make his next move. We're changing the accounts tomorrow, he said. I'll handle the finances from now on. Claire felt the muscles in her jaw tighten. I can handle my own money. Daniel's chair scraped loudly as he leaned forward. You don't need it. Why? She asked. Blake smirked. Because you belong to this family now. Margaret didn't speak. She just watched Claire as if waiting for her to collapse. Claire realized something chilling. They weren't just controlling her life. They were erasing it. That night, while Daniel slept, Claire sat up in bed and pulled out the journal she found in the attic. She reread each word. Rebecca sounded like a woman who loved deeply, trusted blindly, and was broken slowly. She saw flashes of herself in every sentence. But there was one major difference between Rebecca and Claire. Claire knew the truth now. She wasn't blind anymore. So she did the first thing they didn't expect. She reached out for help. Claire waited until daylight and walked to the neighbor's porch, the one house she believed might see through the fog. A middle-aged woman named Carol opened the door, surprised but welcoming. You okay? Claire almost broke down at those two simple words. No, she whispered, how did you know? Carol stepped outside and lowered her voice. Because you're not the first. Claire's blood ran cold. Rebecca? Carol's expression shifted into quiet grief. She came to me for help, too. What happened? Carol hesitated, her eyes flicking to the Hayes house. She disappeared. Claire's pulse raced. Police? They found nothing. That family knows how to hide their tracks. Carol tightened her hand around Claire's. Get out while you still can. But a sudden voice from behind made Claire freeze. Daniel. Get out of where? His expression was calm, almost polite. Too polite. Carol backed away. Claire felt the cage slam shut again. Daniel smiled. Let's go home. Claire followed, but not willingly. Claire was done being quiet, and the moment she spoke the truth out loud, this house would turn into a battlefield. When they stepped back inside the house, Daniel didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply closed the door behind him and stared at Claire for a long, heavy second. That was somehow worse than rage. Rage is human. Silence is calculated. You shouldn't talk to neighbors about private matters, he said. Claire's voice was steady for the first time since she moved in. You shouldn't control my life. Daniel laughed softly. Your life? Everything you have now is because of me. My money? My identity? My freedom? That's what a husband provides. And takes, Claire said. Daniel's jaw twitched, a small, dangerous fracture in his mask. Margaret stepped into the room. Women today are weak. They mistake commitment for control. Claire turned toward her. You mean women today don't accept abuse? Blake appeared in the hallway, curious like a child watching a house fire. Claire realized they were all used to this dynamic. Used to women being swallowed whole. But she wasn't Rebecca. And she wasn't staying quiet anymore. You took her life, Claire said. You took everything from her. Daniel crossed his arms, unmoving. Rebecca left because she couldn't handle responsibility. Rebecca disappeared, Claire corrected. Blake spoke up with a cold casualness. Some people can't survive marriage. The room swung into slow, terrifying clarity. They weren't just toxic. They were dangerous. Claire took a step back. I want my things. I want my life back. You're not leaving, Daniel said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He walked toward her with the slow certainty of a man who believed he owned her. Margaret blocked the door. Blake stood beside her. Trapped again. But something had changed this time. Claire wasn't afraid of them anymore. You can take everything from a woman, she said quietly, but you can't take her courage. Daniel stared at her as if she had just broken the universe's rules. You're staying, he repeated. No, Claire said. Not a whisper. Not an apology. A choice. Right then, she made her first move of rebellion. She walked into the bedroom, locked the door, and dialed her sister across the state. The phone barely rang before her sister's voice answered. Claire. What's wrong? Everything. But the worst part was what came next. Heavy footsteps outside the door. Daniel. Turning the doorknob. Testing the lock. For the first time, Daniel realized the woman he married wasn't the woman he controlled, and the house was about to lose its power. The doorknob rattled harder, more desperate this time. Daniel's voice was cold and steady. Open the door, Claire. Her sister was still on the line. Claire whispered, I'm in danger. I need help. Text me your location, her sister said, suddenly alert. I'm calling the police. Claire had no time to explain. No time to admit the truth she had been burying for weeks. She had been terrified to leave, terrified to be wrong, terrified to lose everything she believed marriage was supposed to give. But fear wasn't running her anymore. She texted her address with shaking fingers. Daniel pounded on the door. We don't do this in this house. Claire turned toward the small bedroom window. Her exit. Her chance. Her only chance. She slid it open, climbed onto the ledge, and dropped into the backyard just as Daniel kicked the door open. The air felt sharp and cold. The night sky was wide and endless. Freedom wasn't a moment, it was a decision. Suddenly, she heard Margaret's voice from behind. You think you can just walk away? Claire turned. Her voice was calm. Too calm. I'm not walking away. I'm escaping. Blake burst through the back door and grabbed her wrist, but Claire had been planning longer than they knew. She jerked her arm away and stepped backward, straight into the neighbor's yard. Carol was standing there. Waiting. You're not alone, Carol said. Not anymore. The front lights of the Hayes house flicked on. Daniel was already running around the corner. But this time Claire felt something she hadn't felt in months. Power. Sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel slowed. Margaret stepped back. Blake froze. Police cruisers pulled up the driveway. Officers stepped out with flashlights. Claire didn't have to say a word. Her bruised courage, her stolen accounts, the neighbors' testimonies, truth was already speaking for her. Daniel tried to argue. Tried to defend himself. Tried to twist the story into loyalty and marriage and sacrifice. But the officers didn't care about speeches. They cared about evidence. They cared about danger. They cared about Claire. And as her sister's car pulled up, Claire realized something that made her knees weaken with relief. She was finally free. Not because someone saved her. Because she saved herself. Daniel was handcuffed and led away. Blake and Margaret were questioned. Carol wrapped a blanket around Claire's shoulders. You did the right thing, Carol whispered. Claire looked at the house, dark, quiet, defeated. "The house didn't break me," she said softly. "I broke it. But even freedom has a price, and tomorrow, Claire will face the truth she feared most, who she is now that she's no longer trapped." The next day, Claire sat in her sister's kitchen, wrapped in borrowed clothes and silence. The world finally felt real again. No cameras. No rules taped to refrigerators. No footsteps outside her door. Just a cup of warm coffee and sunlight breaking through clean windows. Freedom wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was waking up without fear and realizing you didn't owe anyone your voice, your savings, or your worth. When detectives came to speak with her, Claire told them everything. About the missing ex-wife, Rebecca. About the stolen money. About the house that pretended to be a family. About the trap dressed up as marriage. Every word felt like lifting a brick off her chest. Days later, they searched the Hayes home. What they discovered wasn't just financial crime. It was years of manipulation, records of stolen accounts, complaints from previous women, and a long pattern of emotional imprisonment. Rebecca never vanished, not into thin air, at least. She moved states away under a new identity after escaping the same way Claire did. But Rebecca was alive. Claire sat across from her in a small cafe 2 weeks later. Rebecca looked older, wiser, but whole. "You got out sooner than I did," Rebecca said. Claire nodded. "I almost didn't." Rebecca leaned in. "They don't always win. They just think they do." Something inside Claire finally clicked. She thought leaving the house was the end of the story. But it was only the beginning of her real life. She found an apartment. A job. A therapist. A new version of herself, one nobody could own. Months later, she drove past Cedar Lane out of curiosity. The house was empty now. Windows boarded. The lawn is overgrown. No voices inside. No power left. It was just a building. Nothing more. The real prison had always been believing she didn't deserve better. Claire rolled down her window and whispered into the air, not to the house but to the woman she used to be. "You survived. Not perfect. Not healed in a day. But whole. Real. Herself." She drove away without looking back, the wind hitting her face like a promise. The story wasn't about the husband who took everything. It was about the bride who took everything back. Some houses break women. Claire became the woman who broke the house.